How's it going, guys? As promised, here is the first video in our new series, Analysis and Facts on the Manson family. Now, in particular, as I said, this is more aimed towards people my age, people around between the ages of 16 and 30, between there and there. But again, if you're not, or you just don't know the case, or don't know the facts, or anything like that, feel free to watch. And so once again, watch the video before. Let's just kind of get an introduction. So today we're going to be talking about Charles Manson's early life, and by early life I really mean like up to his release from Terminal Island in 1967. Charles Manson was born November 12th of 1934. Born unnamed to a 16-year-old woman named Kathleen Maddox out of Cincinnati, Ohio. But his father doesn't really know who his real father is, but his mother married a guy named William Manson, who was he was like a day laborer, and he adopted his last name. Many people think that it was a name he gave himself because man's son, but that actually furthers the reason why he believes himself, or others believed him. Others believed him to be who he was, and he kind of said, yeah, that makes sense. You know, some people might think, hey, that's him trying to feed to himself, and some people might say, oh, that's other people. So I'm kind of, so his father actually, he didn't know his father, but they knew who his father was, they thought was Colonel Walker Scott, and his mother was 16 only. Imagine that, 16 years old, and so anyway, that means his mom wasn't that old, honestly, when he got convicted in 70. But anyway, so she was sent to jail for various things to feed Manson and feed the family, and not the family, And so basically, he went to live with his aunt, and he went to live with relatives, and grandmother and grandfather, and he had a good life in the beginning. In like 4, 5, 6 years old, that happened. But then when his mother came out of prison, she took him back eventually. And they lived in like garbage areas and that. And eventually, she kept on getting in jail, essentially. And he got put into various boys' schools and various reformatory schools all over the country. Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, you know what I mean? Various different, even Father Flanagan's Boys Town, the famous one with the movie with Mickey Rooney, right? Even that one. And actually, when he entered the Boys Town, there was a newspaper article that said, another boy enters Boys Town, and today he is troubled, but tomorrow he is the future, and he is in the best graces or whatever. And he ran away 3 days later. So he had a very, very, he had a seedy record with running away from these schools, and just wouldn't sit still. He was smart. He was very smart. Excelled in English class in particular, but didn't sit still and was always kind of, that's really because he wasn't raised, he wasn't raised by his mother. He didn't really have a family. He was raised by the streets. He was raised by what he thinks that was right. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily that he was this evil person. You can't blame it all on him. You kind of, and he says this a lot, you kind of got to blame it on the fact that the society threw him out. Not society, but just the way that the fact that he wasn't brought up to teach from what was right and what was wrong, that it's society's fault for saying, well, you're wrong because you don't know what's right and wrong. And he said, well, I'm just doing what I want. I'm just doing what I think is right. And if I've lost you, let me just put this in simpler terms. Because he didn't have a family to tell him what was right or wrong, he didn't really have a judge to say what was right or wrong. And so he kind of just went on what he felt was right, even though society might not think it's right. So he started offenses by committing armed robbery at a burglary store when he was 13 years old. And then several other cases of burglary, and he was sent to various juvenile detention centers. Um, then, when he was 16, he was sent to the legendary National Trading School for Boys for 4 years. Um, and on recommendation of a psychiatrist, he was transferred to um, an honor camp. I am looking at facts on my phone, but I know that I just gotta kind of, I want this to be very factual. I know what I'm talking about, just to clear this up. I am looking at facts on my phone, but I know what I'm talking about, and that is kind of further this analysis. It's tough to remember all these little things. I'm infatuated with the subject. I'm not quite obsessed with it. Um, so I mean, and he was sent numerous times. He was so undisciplined, and that's just because he didn't know, what to do, and he committed these petty little crimes: car thief, robbery, um, forgery. Little things that no murders, no assaults, and there were these reports that whether this is true or untrue is unknown. Really, could be true, could not be true. Probably is true, but it could also not be true. He was beaten and even raped in the various reform schools. Um, and he was sent to a federal reformatory in September of 1952. He actually became a model resident of good behavior, and he was paroled in 1954. But that's when he started his various crimes of car thief and all that, and things of that nature. And he was moved all around the country in various prisons and jails and things like that. So you could already see a troubled childhood just because he wasn't raised. And he tried to go back to his mother at one point when he was about 10 or 11, let's just say. Mother said, "I don't want you." Basically, he in between boys' schools. He had moved around with his mother, 6, 7 months at a time, but she didn't want to raise him. She was just as irresponsible as he was, and you could blame really her for starting it all. Honestly, if he had a good childhood, even he said it at one point. If he had a good childhood, maybe he'd have a different life, but that's not the path that he walks. Um, so you could really see. This is why I'm starting from this point, because if I go into Charles Manson, the murder, if I start with Tate LaBianca murders, just as a lot of other detective um, perspective things do, you're going to think, oh, he's crazy. But really, it's a reflection of what he was dealt in life. And it's unfortunate, but I'm not justifying it. I'm just defending why. I'm defending the fact that I'm not defending anything. Hold on. I'm basically stating that there's more that meets the eye. There's more that meets the eye than just what the media portrays. And while I do think we'll get into that in another video. So in September 1958, he received 5 years parole. After being, many different times arrested between 54 and 58. But then, just like a year later, he charged. He was charged with forging a treasury note, and he received a 10-year suspended sentence when a woman named Leona was said to have claimed to love him. Now, Leona was not his first wife. He was his second wife. He actually married a woman by the name of Rosalie Jean Willis first. I've been talking about the arrest, but I realized once the Leona thing popped up, I forgot to talk about the first marriage. So the first marriage was Rosalie Willis, and he has a children named Charles Manson Jr. And I forget if it's him or Charles Luther Manson who committed suicide because he couldn't live down the name. But whatever it was, he had a child under her, and basically she ran. They were partners in crime together. He claims that he did this marriage mainly for sex, and they were partnered kind of in crime. And she said, go steal a car, and he said, all right, go steal a car. And he tries to bring her down with me, and she says, nope, I didn't do that, and says, I have a child. Why would I do that? And now I know I'm sounding kind of like I'm for Manson here, but in the sense, that's kind of what happened. Was he wrong doing that? Yes. Should he not? Should he have done that? No. But it's interesting. And then ran off with another man upon his release. His second marriage was to Leona Stevens, the woman who said loved him and they were going to have a child together, which was Charles Luther Manson. And guess what? That's right. He was given a 10-month suspended probation. And you know what? Well, it was good for him, interestingly enough. And so that was a good time where he was really out of it. It was a really good time where he was out of it. Just to review, his first actual imprisonment was in 1951. Before that, it was reform schools, but after that, it was 1951 was his second imprisonment. And starting in 1958, upon his major parole, um, he um, he actually started pimping a 16-year-old girl, and to receive extra child support. And that's when he started with pimping. And he was a very good pimp because of his persuasive nature. That's really what he learned in prison was his persuasive, being who he is, being his philosophies. He was raised in the prisons, essentially. And he did a lot of bad things. He did a lot of bad things. I mean, car thief, forgery. That's bad. Yeah, it's just some of that's on yourself. You do parole. Come on, man. You're paroled. You're given a second chance in society. Come on. I mean, even the sense of you're raised up in your prison. You know right for wrong in the sense of the boys' schools. But when you're out in the world, you know what's right and what's wrong. But maybe you could say he was going back to prison for the comfort of it in him. Prison was his home. He lived half his life in prison. So the big thing was that what really got him back in prison, as I said, was the forgery check in 1959. But then he didn't show up to basically the parole meeting or whatever it was, or the sentencing meeting, and so then he was charged with that, and then eventually, a bench warrant. He was in violation of probation because he disappeared, right? He failed and then in 1961, he unsuccessfully appealed the revoke of his probation, and he was transferred to the county jail in Los Angeles. Now you might be like, how do we get to Los Angeles? Well, he moved around the country with his mother, and by the time where he got incarcerated in the 50s, he kind of started working his way west with his wives, and eventually, in the very early 60s, moved to Los Angeles. Very early 60s, and he was sent to the penitentiary of Terminal Island, and this is where he learned how to play guitar from Alvin Creepy Carvus, a former mobster playing the steel guitar, probably more blues inspired, definitely more blues, more jazz, more old time music rather than rock and roll and electric blues. So it was a steel guitar. It was not an electric guitar, of course, and Manson did not play the electric guitar. He played the acoustic guitar. But even though his mother was very neglectful, apparently she moved to Washington State to be closer to him. So in 1963, I'm a little confused about this here, actually. Sorry. Okay. So the case was eventually dropped, and in 1963, Leona had a divorce, right? Divorce from him. But in June 1966, he was sent for the second time in his life to Terminal Island in preparation for his early release. And okay, I was just a little bit confused in that essence of all this. The fact that this whole forgery, it's very confusing. So if you have any questions, comments, or private message, but this is just the basic gist of it. He was actually sent to early release in 1967 because he was a great prisoner. He was great, and according to officials, he had his years, he had his moments where he was great. Couple years, he had great, and then all of a sudden, one incident like a fight or a little crime would send him back, either to prison or in prison would send him back, barring early release. But he granted early release in 1967, and he said, "Whoa, man. I don't want to be released." He actually said, "I want to stay in prison because I don't know what's out there. My life is in prison." And they said, "Nope, free to go." So, free to go. So to wrap it all up for his early life, um, before we wrap it up and kind of review, real quick for about a minute, I just want to talk about the girls' early lives, not in detail. We'll get to that next video. But the fact that all these girls, either their parents got divorced, one of their parents died, their parents kicked them out of the house, or they got involved with drugs because of a sibling or because of a friend or an influence. And this is all what kind of led them into this Haight-Ashbury district, that they had bad home lives, just as Manson did. And that's kind of the connection between him and these girls, and that these girls fell into that at the age of 16, 17, something that he didn't have when he was 16, 17, was that free kind of peace, love. And had he been alive when had he been Tex Watson's age or something like that, maybe he would have not been incarcerated so many times. But to wrap it all up, Manson, very troubled childhood because of his mother only being 16, a bastard child, and um, you know, didn't really have a family growing up. He grew up in reformatory schools and boys' schools and prisons, and that led him to do crime after crime after crime, and not murder, not physical assault, more just petty crimes, and got him down a road of trouble. And his prison record was noted by a lot of LAPD. And when he got out in '67, he was paroled, and of course, what you'd know would happen later, or what you wouldn't know would happen later, and that's what these videos are for. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, comments, this is just kind of a fact summary. We're not really getting into the analysis that much. There was some analysis here, but not much, because there's really not much analysis to say. This is kind of clear, cut, and dry. Skeptical things I said about, and so yeah, that will be it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Yeah.